What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Oh boy, every once in a while I pop this on and I make sure that I can get the link to the show, and then it scares me every time because I hear myself reverb. So all of a sudden, there I was talking to myself. Well, first Bears game is in the books, everybody, and it did not go the way that I think any of us wanted to, as the pride and joy that is Chicago's Bear defense was terrible. I mean, I could say that with a smile on my face, but I just want to get out of the way right before we start the show that defensive performance was everything that any negative pundit worried it might be with defensive back issues, if not worse. So with Stafford and the Rams basically throwing up lollipop 67, 55, 35-yard bombs almost at will and converting almost every 3rd and 10, at least it seemed like, it doesn't go good from there. But anyways, I don't know if you know this, but I have brought along the only man on Twitter known as Butkus Stats, and help me pronounce your last name, Quinten, because I'm lost. Krzysko. That is a way easier name to pronounce than it is spelled. Goodness gracious. Either way, good to have you. Thanks so much for joining. So, for those of you who don't know, me and Q are going to record Bear With Me while you're talking in the chat, and then we're going to do a Q&A afterwards. So the first part of this is going to be all podcast, and then from there, hang on, who's saying can't hear me? Are we coming through? Oh. Talk again, Quinten.
Yeah.
Say anything. Introduce yourself.
I'm Quinten Krzysko at Butkus Stats, write for OnTap Sportsnet, do Chicago Bears content and NFL content in general.
Perfect. All right, so it sounds like the stream is all set up. Thank you guys for being patient. We go in and out with so many different technical things that we just want to make sure everything's square. Perfect. So let's get this thing rolling. You ready, Q?
Absolutely.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And I got good news and bad news for you. On one hand, the season has started. Chicago Bears football is well and truly in swing, and the bad news is that they dropped their season opener on national television 14-34 to the Los Angeles Rams. So hopefully it gets better from here, but either way, I've brought along Quinten Krzysko from OnTap Sportsnet, also known as Butkus Stats on Twitter, one of the rising stars, if you will, of Bears blogosphere, whatever you want to call what we do. But Quinten, I've loved seeing your stuff online. You do phenomenal work, whether it's niche stats or intense stat work, very similar to Jonathan Wood over at the Bears blog. And honestly, I'm just happy to have you on. What'd you think of the game? How are you doing?
Didn't love it, but is like we've kind of talked about a little here, is kind of what you expected to some degree. Wish you saw a little more from the defense, though. It was just like the floodgates opened on them.
Mm-hmm. No kidding. I mean, one thing that I know I had saved, so I think it's Kevin Fishbane that put out a tweet in the middle of the game basically saying that the Bears have now equaled their 50-plus yard pass touchdowns allowed. Is that normally in 2015, for instance, they allowed 2 50-plus yard touchdowns. In 2016, they allowed 1. 2017, 1. 2018, 2. 2019, 1. 2020, 1. And here in 2021, a 17-game season, they've already allowed 2. So I think it's safe to say things are trending in the wrong direction defensively. What did you see that stuck out? Let's talk through the defense first, because while I know offense has been the hot topic with Justin Fields, who played today for crying out loud, I think it's fair to say that the 34 defensive points allowed, and that's honestly being nice, because I feel like at past a certain point the Rams just let up the gas, is without a doubt the big concern, right?
What really stood out to me was, it seemed like early in the game, the Rams were saying, we're not even going to try to run on them because we don't think we can. And then late in the game, when they start burning clock, we couldn't stop the run. But I mean, the Rams just were picking up 5, 10 yards every time they carried the ball, and made you wonder, were they just not running on us because they didn't think they needed to, just didn't think they could.
Right.
Um, They just couldn't stop the big plays was the other thing I was thinking. The coverage was just a mess, and I'm not an expert on the X's and O's there with the coverages, but there was stuff going wrong all over the place.
Yeah, if I was going to try to talk through it, and I'll do my usual All 22 review on Wednesday if the NFL lets out the All 22 footage, because honestly, there's no real point in not trying or in doing it without it. But getting back to brass tacks, for any Bears fans wanting to know what happened, it looked as if Sean Desai was playing the defense primarily out of a 2-high set. So that means you've got Eddie Jackson and Tashawn Gibson starting at least in the backfield, and they did a whole lot of nickel, meaning that Jalen Johnson, Kendall Vildor, and good old Marquis Christian were on the field all at the same time. And the problem is that I've seen, a lot of vitriol directed towards number 4, Eddie Jackson, who really struggled to tackle. And that first touchdown seems like it was pretty much entirely, I don't know whether it was entirely on him, but it certainly seemed as if he was a huge part in it. But the trouble is, Quinten, like you're saying, Eddie Jackson's still one guy. And even if he pulls off his assignment, you've got Marquis Christian, who was basically the guy who beat out Duke Shelley in a battle of the backups. You've got Kendall Vildor, a 5th-round pick. Jalen Johnson, a former 2nd-round pick, so he's probably your highest pedigreed DB other than Eddie Jackson. And Tashawn Gibson, who are not playing great as a unit. They aren't supporting each other. That Cooper Kupp 51-yard touchdown, by the way, came almost entirely off of Tashawn Gibson completely blowing his coverage assignment, because he's got to be the cap on that defense. So Jackson made mistakes. Christian made some mistakes. Vildor, he made mistakes, mostly on 3rd and 10s. Gibson blew a coverage. You can't find a Bears defensive back that didn't make some pretty horrific mistakes, and I don't know if that can be fixed throughout the course of a season. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so basically the way I always look at coverages is it comes down to communication and reliability. Those were two things that it didn't seem like they were on the same page with tonight. Now, maybe that's something that gets better over the course of a season, but Gibson's a returning starter with Jackson. It's not like he's a new guy and they don't know each other. They just messed up, or Gibson just messed up on that Kupp play. And I don't have a whole lot of faith that a guy like Christian is going to get a whole lot better at this point. He's been around the league for a few years now, and it's not like this is something new to him. It's scary to think about where this secondary could be in a few weeks, because I'm not sure how much better they'll get.
Yep. Somebody in the comments section on this live show specifically said that this game looked like a preseason game, and I'll tell you what, from the Rams' offensive perspective, it kind of had the feel of it. What is it? Matthew Stafford finished with an above 150 quarterback rating. That's the sort of thing that doesn't happen with a good defensive performance. Once you start really getting close to perfection, sure, Stafford played really well, but also he was pitching layups. These guys were wide open. I think the play that really solidified it for me, it was not the 67-yard bomb to Van Jefferson for a touchdown, and it was not the Cooper Kupp touchdown or the second Cooper Kupp touchdown. It was that one right there near the end of the game that really planted the dagger, where Stafford rolled out to his right on, the 11-yard line, something like that, and it looked like Ogletree and Marquis Christensen and Kendall Vildor were in coverage, and they actually blanketed their assignments, and you could see Stafford waiting patiently, trying to find something open, and would you believe it, Kristen lost his man, and Stafford threw a touchdown, and it looked easy. This looked easy. I think that was the worst part, is this did not have the feel of Thursday night's showing that had the Bucs defense and the Dallas defense at least playing hard and feeling like the defenses were giving up points, sure, but that the offenses were earning it. I don't know about you. This felt to me like the Rams could have had more if they wanted to, but they just kind of had enough past a certain point. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds accurate to me. It didn't almost to your point, it didn't feel like chess match between the offense and defense where the offense was edging out the defense and, continually barely getting there. It was, as you said, layups. It was easy. It was just, that we're going to be able to do this, so we're just going to go do it.
Right. And I feel like the worst part about all of it was that you've got all these defenders. Like, I could go through a list of them, right? Akeem Hicks looked awesome tonight. Khalil Mack's getting paid $30 million. Eddie Jackson's getting paid $15 million. Roquan Smith's due for a huge extension. Hicks specifically, to go back to this whole point, is being paid $12 million. Quinn's being paid $16 million. And in a weakest link conundrum like defense often offers, where having one Marquis Christian on the field or one Kindle Vildor in a 3rd and 10 man up situation, like having one weak link on the field can cost you the down. Whether it's not usually supposed to be 67-yard freebie touchdown passes. Obviously, Cooper Kupp's was probably more open. I should just keep citing that one. But you get the idea. It feels as if the Bears are, to say the least, not getting value out of the money that they're spending on defense. Would you agree?
Yeah. I'd absolutely agree. So for these games, this is something I started during the preseason here. I just put plus or minus next to each player's name every time I notice them making a mistake or doing something that is more than expected of them. For being a starter in the NFL is kind of my baseline. And watching the game, it was like Khalil Mack didn't wow me very often. I love Khalil Mack, and I'm a huge supporter of him, but there needs to be something more there. Same with Eddie Jackson. Between the missed tackles and he got more minuses than he did pluses out there, which is a red flag for any player, to be having more negative plays than largely positive plays from even a casual viewer. One thing that stands out to me really is that I had Quinn down for more plus plays than Mack. He had more minus plays as well, but Quinn got into the backfield more consistently based on what I saw, which we first view, haven't seen the all 22, haven't rewatched, but just based on first view of it.
Yep. Look, I hate talking about Mack. Honestly, I really do.
Yeah.
Because Khalil Mack is objectively a great defender, right? I think we can agree with that.
I don't think there's any question about that. This can all be prefaced with he's one of the best defensive players in the NFL.
Right. He's just being paid more than a lot of quarterbacks at this point. Like $30 million cap hit. The Bears are sinking tons of money into Mack, and namely committing a huge percentage of their cap to somebody who did not have the defensive impact that Aaron Donald did, and Donald didn't even have a big impact this game. We'll talk about the offense here in a little bit, but I struggle to not want more from number 52.
Right.
It's not that I feel like he's playing badly. I think that's the most frustrating part. But it does feel like he's not getting through to the quarterback near like I'd like him to. He obviously needs blitz support, just like most edge rushers, but still, he needs it. And he probably can't realistically back up a defensive back unit that it felt to me like the real turning point. Again, like, we've got these 2 long touchdowns, but I still remember when the Bears were really scrapping for it, right? I think this was the 3rd quarter, but I'd have to go back and and look again. I just remember that the Bears stuffed a run and they knocked down a pass. This was when Jalen Johnson jumped and almost picked off that pass, if you remember. Like, he jumped up to knock the ball down and the ball landed in his hands and completely surprised him. Right after that, 3rd and 10, Bears needed to get off the field because then they could give the ball back to their offense, who might be able to go take the lead. Who knows? They did not. Stafford got what looked like an easy completion over the middle as the Rams were able to isolate Kindle Vildor and make him look like a 2019 5th-round pick. Like, that's, I think, the biggest problem here is that I'm not frustrated with Vildor. I'm not even necessarily frustrated with Christian. At the end of the day, I'm really frustrated with Ryan Pace that these are our starters You know what I
Uh,
mean? When Elijah Wilkinson is playing left tackle for you because you already went through your 5th round rookie Larry Borum, you throw your hands up past a certain point and go, well, not everybody on your depth can be good. But when Marquis Christensen and Kendall Vildor are free yardage to the Los Angeles Rams on national television, and those are the guys you're starting, like if they get hurt, somebody worse comes in the game. That really stings because it means that, to me at least, it means that against Tampa Bay, against Baltimore, against Green Bay, well, then again, who knows? Maybe Rodgers mails in the Green Bay games. But you get the idea. The Bears have a meat grinder of a schedule. It shouldn't get better against Cleveland. It shouldn't get better against the Seahawks. We could be in for a long one on defense, you know?
yeah. Really, it feels like they're going to need to rely on quarterbacks who hold the ball too long. The pass rush should be able to get home because stuff's just open.
It's painful. And I also feel for Desai a little bit, if only because I actually don't know what the solution is in the modern age to scheming bad defensive backs into position. I mean, you'd have to count on some more pass rush. I'd probably just blitz. But once you get to the point where you're playing really blitz-heavy football, you know the risks you're taking. The trouble is that, like bend don't break doesn't work when the only thing that ever happens is you eventually break, you know?
Well, and I feel like you can play a more blitz-heavy system if you have faith that your offense can be explosive. Now, you can take those risks at that point when it's not a 13-play drive to get 50 yards for a touchdown.
Yep. I feel like that is one thing, though, that I actually want to talk about, the offense specifically. And I was hoping okay, here's a question. Before we get into the offense, do you feel like there's anything we haven't covered on the defense? Did anybody particularly play well, in your opinion?
Well, Ogletree made some nice plays, I thought, at points, but then he just completely wiped it out later in the game with some huge errors. So that's a moot point looking at that. Hicks had some nice plays, I thought. He really took on some guys, some double teams, and was just the same old Akeem Hicks that we've loved over the years, I thought. Let's see. Iris Tonga did have a nice play down the stretch there that I liked after getting tossed a little earlier by an offensive lineman. But outside of that, no one really stood out on the defense that much for me, aside from Hicks on a few plays. It was just very pedestrian overall, it felt like.
Yeah, and I mean, just to throw some gas on that fire, it is, or maybe this is water, but I think it's water now that I think about it. But it's hard for a defense to stand out without playing well, right? It's very rare that one defender makes you go, man, they did really well, and you also got boat raced. So I get it. I felt like Hicks also played pretty well, all things told. He got some pressure on the passer. I saw Kairos Tonga a little more than I anticipated. He came up with a couple of run stops that I wouldn't have expected out of a 7th-rounder. I thought Jalen Johnson was decent. Maybe not great, but he wasn't near as bad as the other defensive backs, by and large. And Roquan had some nice blitzes. He had some solid run plays. He seemed okay in coverage. I feel like that'll probably show itself more in the All-22. I just wish he didn't get burned on that 37-yarder. But again, like we've talked about, when a defender gets caught in conflict, there is no winning. And I have a feeling that Roquan got sucked up on a run assignment of some kind before getting thrown over the top, so I don't know how much I'd really critique him when, hey, defenders can't be perfect, you know?
Yeah. He did have a few blitzes that did stand out some to me, especially one where he pulled a double team off Akeem Hicks with a false step and then dropped back to take away the receiver from Stafford, and that's what allowed Hicks to be able to get in. And Hicks and Quinn were able to collapse the pocket onto Stafford. That play was one that stood out to me as one that we used to see more regularly. You know, one that used to feel pretty common for this defense. And on the Jalen Johnson front, I thought that he did play well. I think that something that they're seeing is really just the impact of the depth at the other cornerback positions. I think that Stafford can look there and say, okay, I don't have to look at Johnson. I can go over here. I can go over there. And that's a real thing that the Bears are having to deal with right now when they're starting this type of talent.
Absolutely. I mean, when a quarterback and a play caller are going through trying to pick out what kind of play they're going to run in a given situation, they often come up with a defensive target. That's not going to blow anybody's mind, but it definitely goes through the process that they're not necessarily saying to themselves, oh, let's do a double post because we like a double post. Oftentimes they're saying, for instance, to use a double post, let's try to split a single high safety. And if not, we'll go here to attack this defensive back. I wonder, and again, part of why I want to see the All-22, whether Jalen Johnson played well or the other defensive backs just played worse. I mean, Johnson had his fair share of plays, don't get me wrong, but if I was Stafford, why bother looking at Robert Woods when Van Jefferson's going to eat Kindle Vildor's lunch? Why bother looking at, again, Jalen Johnson when Cooper Kupp is matched up on Marquis Christian? And if he falls off, you're going to get passed to a safety, and he ends up wide open. I mean, it was just so easy for Stafford that I don't know whether Jalen Johnson truly locked his man down or the other guys were just, preseason tier. But those are harsh words. I know those are not what anybody wants to hear, but oh my word, this is not the kind of defensive performance that leaves you thinking anything positive.
Another thing that dawns on me with Marquis Christian is I believe he was with the Rams for a little bit. I'm either he was or I'm getting him mixed up with Xavier Crawford. But so if any coaching staff knows what he can do against their receivers, it's probably the Rams. I mean, if he was going up against Cooper Kupp in practice, they know how that matchup looks. One other defensive player that I do want to mention, at least a few plays that I saw, was Eddie Jackson. He missed some tackles, absolutely, but he also made a few plays in the run game that stood out to me, especially one in the first half. He was up on the line of scrimmage. He fought off a block and went in and made a run stuff, and it was like, whoa, that's Eddie Jackson. So, I mean, he had his faults in this game, but that was one that did stand out to me of him trying to get his nose a little dirty there. I just wish he might have had the same mentality on the 67-yard touchdown to just jump on the guy.
Right. I mean, to back up Eddie Jackson a little bit, and again, I haven't seen the All-22, and we've both admitted he played poorly. But when you're a safety, you can't be two defenders at once. You can only be one, right? To use the 51-yard Cooper Kupp touchdown as an example, the Rams ran what kind of imitated a smash concept to that side of the field. So they basically had somebody run a flag route, or whatever you call the one where it's not a post because that goes towards the middle, but it goes towards the sidelines. I think it's called a flag. But so they ran that drew Eddie Jackson over the top there. So Gibson was supposed to pick up Cooper Kupp when he came into the middle of the field because Jackson was already shading over to stop an 18 to 22 yard smash route. And that got pinned on Jackson because when Kristen stopped running, Jackson was the guy in the picture. And you know how it goes. When you see the guy chasing the play, it's probably his fault, or at least that's oftentimes what we can think. The trouble here is that
good route concept by McVay there, because if you look at the guy up the mid-right side that Gibson had his eyes on clearly, he froze Gibson right there because he could have gone deep right there too. And like you said, he was in conflict, and you don't usually win when you're in conflict there.
The trouble is that, like you're saying and kind of getting at, a good play call doesn't make Bears fans feel better about spending $15 million on a safety that isn't making tackles. So I totally get how Eddie Jackson has quickly become a lightning rod of criticism and so on and so forth. He earned plenty of it, especially being quoted as saying, anybody can tackle. Anybody can tackle. You got to make a play on the ball. And he didn't either. But it'll be interesting. I guess we'll just say interesting's a word to see how Desai navigates this DB debacle.
So even on that what Jackson said there, and this just might be me being a homer optimist, but when I first saw that, I thought he was saying anyone can make the tackle, only some people can make the tackle and punch the ball out. Like he was trying to teach the guy something. And and then I saw the backlash. I was like, oh, I guess I misread that. But that was my first thought seeing it.
It's still out of context, like you're getting at. I mean, what Jackson's trying to say is make a play on the ball, as in when you see the route coming, get there before the ball does. So if they throw it, it's a pick, and if they don't, you covered your assignment. Like, it's not intended to be, I don't like tackling, but it still comes across badly when you don't read into the context.
Still a little bit of truth and stuff like that.
Right, exactly. And, I mean, Jackson did not look motivated to make tackles tonight, but we digress. We've got plenty of offense to talk about, which, Bears fans, I'm just going to let you in on it right now. I ended up with a lot more positivity towards the offense than I came into the game anticipating, but let's get into that on the flip. Q, I'll catch you on the other side.
All right. So yeah, basically offense. This was the best offense we've seen in a while.
No worries, Q. I'll bring us back in. That's where we
so
go
I
to
didn't know
commercial.
what you-
That's where the podcast goes to commercial in the middle, and then we come back in. Ready?
Okay.
And we are back with Bear With Me post-game, talking about Bears versus the Rams, and a final score we do not need to talk about. Let's talk about the offense, where Justin Fields scored his first NFL touchdown in his first NFL game, and the Bears ended up marching out about 14 points and some... let's just talk about it, because whether it's decent looking, frustrating, better than you expected, I feel like a lot of adjectives could apply to this, and past a certain point, it almost seems as if beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? Because the Bears just dinked and dunked their way through 6 to 8 offensive drives. I don't think they ever went 3 and out, except for maybe at the end, where I know I stopped paying attention, but it felt, Quinten, to me anyways, like the play calling wasn't ridiculous. The Bears got movement on the ground, which was a little shocking given the state of their offensive line. David Montgomery looked like the clear-cut best player on the Bears offense, and I mean that in a very positive way. Huge game from him. I don't know. For as bad as the defense was, the offense, which is obviously the focal point when you've got a potential franchise quarterback, actually didn't look that bad. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean now, granted, we need to frame this in the right perspective of Bears fans who have watched some pretty atrocious offense over the last few years.
Right.
But they moved the ball more than they have in recent memory. Whether they actually converted that movement into points was a whole nother question. But they were able to move the ball continuously and get first downs, which was something more than we've seen in a while. That ground game, man, I mean, David Montgomery looked good. Mm-hmm. Looked very good. Better than he's looked in a Bears jersey ever. So he's looking for a payday next year, I guess, because he put in a lot of work this offseason, and it's very obvious. Mm-hmm. Really, offensive line was a bit better than I expected, if I'm being completely honest. And some of that might come down to Rams lost a lot of depth on their D-line in the offseason. I'm not sure if everyone realized how much between Brockers. They lost another starter on the D-line, and they lost one of their edge rushers. So we were talking about Leonard Floyd, Aaron Donald, and a bunch of new guys for the most part on that defensive line. Which is still enough to wreck a game. They were able to manage it well enough that you say they didn't wreck this game.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least. I would have to go back through and actually check the stats to know what I'm talking about here. Maybe you know them off the top of your head and you're a godsend like that, but you don't have to. I can't remember the last time that the Bears got 100 yards on the ground while the game was still in play. I mean, last year, the Bears' offensive ground game was just putrid, as it was in 2019. But this game, it felt as if the Bears running the ball was a focal point of the offense. They did it really well, too. I mean, just to talk scheme, it felt as if the Bears did a great job of understanding that if you don't have great offensive linemen, all you can do is constantly shuffle where the blocker is coming from to confuse defensive linemen and make it to where they don't know who is and isn't engaging them on every single play. A perfect example of this is that there's a one David Montgomery run I remember in particular where he gained about 12 yards. I think this was later in the second quarter as the Bears led that touchdown drive, where you saw them peel Cole Kmet behind Jason Peters to bump Aaron Donald as Whitehair and Peters stepped left to create a hole between Kmet and Whitehair. And it's not as if Kmet got a huge piece of Donald, but he slowed him enough to give Montgomery a space while also confusing Donald, who's not expecting the tight end to come get him. Credit to the Bears, whether it's Castillo, Nagy, or whoever, but they attacked this Rams defensive line that I think is a little more talented than their offensive line pretty well, all the way up until they obviously lost both left tackles and were behind 2 touchdowns where things really started to fall apart. I mean, what did you see? Does that seem like a decent read to you of the run game?
Yeah. What really stood out to me with the run game was felt like, and some guys out there like Kubiak and Shanahan are absolute masters at this, but it felt like they matched the run blocking schemes with the pass blocking schemes, which has always been a complaint from me about Nagy. I didn't think that they tried to do that very much or enough and did a good job of it, whatever it might have been. But tonight it seemed like there were a few plays where Montgomery got 5+ yards, and I'm watching, and I'm going, I didn't even touch guys that much, which means that the scheme was much better because they were pulling guys out of position, because for the last 2 years they've been saying, oh, we know when these guys move like this, it's going over here.
Yep.
This is what's happening. So they were able to move the defenders without the need of pure power to do it, which was nice to see. It was interesting to see that they were able to evolve it like that.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I will say is that it felt as if Nagy really iterated on a lot of things that didn't work in 2020. Like, again, we're talking about one football game, so we can only take so much away from this. But one thing that I noticed was that the Bears last year did a whole lot of what was supposedly popular, assuming you have talent on your offensive line. Namely, they ran a lot of duo, which is what it sounds like. For any of you who don't know football terms, it's basically just all of your offensive linemen double team the guy in front of them, and ideally you get some push on the defensive tackles and you go from there. It's supposed to work because it's just a straight double team. It's not your standard inside or outside zone where you start with a double team and then you climb to a second assignment. It is a double team. They namely tried this against the Colts and the Rams, and if you guys remember, they got nothing out of it. Like, they got nothing out of that. This game, they went to duo rarely. They basically just tried to trot out, like I said, a ton of different blocking assignments. They varied things really well. They used toss crack. They tried a reverse. They went with duo. They went with more of a pin and pull. They went with inside zone, outside zone. They kind of did it all. And maybe more importantly, the offensive line had one false start, which was technically Cole Kmet, if you want to count him as the offensive line. But they didn't take any penalties that I can remember outside of that. And they looked together, which was not something you could say about the 2020 offensive line.
Yeah.
We're talking baby steps. We're talking moral victories, and I get that. But this did feel like it has a real potential to be a stronger and much more creative running attack than we saw at last year or the year before, which is a very low bar, but it's still one to kind of get excited about clearing, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the basic stuff. I mean, at the high school level, you talk about how the offensive line is one unit and it grows from there. But it's something that we haven't really had the last few years, of a single unit out there playing as one. And it might not have been effective in everything they tried tonight, but they played as one, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does.
They showed something, at least in the schematic aspect of it, of being able to execute what they're trying to do, even if it wasn't always pretty.
Absolutely. And speaking of executing, even if it wasn't always pretty, we have to talk about the pass game, right?
Yeah.
So I'll try to get out ahead of one thing that I did want to talk about. The Bears' offensive line was kind of assisted by the fact that the Rams run a very modern defense. And what this means is that they were going up against lighter box counts than might be normal on other teams. Like, I think the Rams were playing mostly out of a two high quarters look. That was the impression I got anyways, because there were like no DBs in the picture for the majority of the game, as they seemed to be deliberately taking away vertical shots and trusting their defensive line to just sort of dominate the Bears and go from there. Which, again, even if it's a lighter box count, you've still got to give credit where it's due to the fact that they got the run game moving. But I say all this, Q, because I know nobody's excited to watch anybody dink and dunk. Nobody's excited to watch Andy Dalton attempt a longest pass of, I think it was 11 yards. Like, let that sink in, that the longest throw we attempted.
That was short of the sticks.
Right. That one was 13 yards. So, hooray. The longest attempted was 13, completed 11. But technically, against the Rams' quarter front, that's not a bad plan. Like, the question becomes, is this just the Nagy offense, or was this a 1 week plan that was actually decently put together? We don't know, but we do know that the pass game looked efficient whenever they stayed out of sack trouble, and they definitely didn't catch a lot of breaks. Like, I always go back to that early on clear defensive pass interference that got called, and don't get me wrong, the referees break the way that they do. You're not always going to get every call. Jalen Johnson was offsides on one of the only Bears stops of the game, and they just let that roll. So, you give and you get. But the Bears offense in general seemed like it was able to consistently pick up first downs, which is more than we used to be able to say about, at the very least, the Nick Foles offense, right? And there the Bears were at halftime, still in the game. There the Bears were in the third quarter, still in the game. And it really felt like the wheels fell off when it became absolutely clear that, I think it was 14-27 at the time, at 4th and 15, that Matt Nagy had no faith in his defense. And then all of a sudden, as a fan, it was like, well, I don't believe in Dalton to leave this kind of comeback. And I don't get the impression Nagy did either. But I don't know. I'm not trying to stand for the guy. It seemed as if the play calling had its ups and downs. The Bears tried a lot of things. That Justin Fields reverse did not work. As well as bringing in the shuffle pass and so on and so forth. But a lot of the things that they did work. And I'm curious to see what carries over to Cincy and what doesn't, because if it still just looks like dink and dunk and that's the offense, this is a very, very limited offense. But if it was a 1 week plan, maybe we see a couple more intermediate and deep throws next week. I can't tell yet, because the Rams are taking it all away.
I have to think that it was more of victim of the circumstance if they're playing quarters all game, that there were probably some deep shots built in that they just weren't there. And that with all the speed they have on this roster, they were able to build in some underneath stuff, especially on those curl routes, to take advantage of it. But if that's all you're running all year, speed's pointless, because you're not going to keep that cushion that the speed gives you if you're not using it.
Right.
You know?
And what has me thinking, by the way, that it's quarters, just for anybody who wants to think through the game out there, is Dalton kept throwing to the flat, and he kept throwing between the hashes, between the hashes and the numbers on little curl routes. And I kept finding myself thinking, if they were playing cover 3, or especially if they were playing cover 1, or things that would defend the flats, we would have seen a lot more of what we saw with Foles last year, with DBs breaking back and batting down the curl routes that were consistently very, very open, that sort of dink and dunk plan, if that is your only plan against those kinds of looks, should be pretty easy to stop, Instead, It seemed as if the Rams were content to let the Bears basically just gain yards and clip down the field up until around the 40-yard line, where admittedly the Rams consistently made a play. They'd sack Dalton, they'd force an incompletion that the Bears didn't expect, they'd create a loss of yardage, etc., and then the Bears would end up in a 4th down situation, and as we saw, Dalton was over. I'm not about to say that this game inspired confidence in Andy Dalton. If anything, I'd say he kind of seemed like he was who we thought he was. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that something that does stand out to me that you mentioned is stalling at about the 40. That's something that has been an issue for them for 2019 and 2020, and to start out 2021 too. They can get into that opponent territory. It almost seems like so often they're playing for the sticks, not for anything else. And that's where that stalls up, is when you're just trying to get the next first down, and I mean, maybe that's quarterback not taking the shot downfield. Maybe that's the defense saying, we're not going to let you take a shot because we know you can't do this. It's been a constant issue with this Nagy offense of stalling in that area of the field.
Absolutely. And it's got to get better. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that can just persist going forward, but I know if I sound overly positive, it's because I came into this game with no expectations, knowing that last year with the Nick Foles-led Bears offense, not only did we not run the ball, but we couldn't pass the ball either. And so when we came into this game and seemed like we were a functional football team that was moving the ball along, like sure, we had our defensive issues, but we've got Justin Fields in the pipeline. We need to see the offensive scheme look decent, or else the Bears are truly sunk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So with that, I felt like this was a nice turn of events from Nagy, but it's obviously still got to ultimately get better than 14 points. Like, we do not need to break out the maracas and throw a fiesta over a 14-point offensive performance, good defense or not. The buck stops somewhere. It's just a matter of, okay, that was a ton better than the preseason, suffice to say. Can you do better than your starting quarterback throwing an end zone interception to open the game up, and a little bit more of what got us into the end zone twice?
I think the natural progression of the offense, the first thing is, can you get yards? And that's something that they did tonight. Next progression is, can you get a first down when you need it? That's something that they didn't do tonight. And I think the third progression is, can you turn those first downs into points? And that's also something that they couldn't do. I think looking back to 2018, they could do the third, but I'm not sure that they could do the first two. And that's where it came back on them in 19 and 20. And that's where they're still kind of or I guess tonight was kind of a progression in that you could get yards, you couldn't do the rest. When they're not set up with the easy points, they're kind of in the same spot they have been. One thing that was nice to see at halftime was a close to 1-to-1 pass-to-run ratio for the first time in a long time, at least in games that, weren't done in the second quarter because they were playing the Jaguars trying to get Trevor Lawrence. That's something we'll see if it carries over. I mean, going up against the Bengals next week, I would think it would, because I don't think they're that stout of a run defense. The Browns will be more of a question on whether they go back to pass happy or not, but which I'm sure they kind of will have to if it goes anything like tonight did. But
oh my gosh, the Browns game is going to be a stomach game. Like, I think we can already feel it, right? That if you don't have the stomach for it, don't watch. Like, that should be a beating. That might be the toughest beating that they'll take this season. But that's not what this is about. This isn't a preview show for 2 or 3 weeks from now.
Right.
But I don't know. I really did come in cute. I watched so many games last year, like the Saints game, right? For the playoff game, Saints game, where the Bears scored 3 points. They got absolutely nothing. And it was just a matter of time before the offense just puttered and stalled out. This week, it felt as if the Bears offense actually had an identity. I mean, I know that that's something that's been thrown around, but the Bears were a surprisingly creative run team led by a running back that was playing with his eyes on fire. I mean, David Montgomery blasting through Aaron Donald so that he could blast through 3 defensive backs and score a touchdown was like legendary Chicago stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, he looked, I can't even say how good. Like
He looks so
you
good.
can't put it into words. It
Nope.
was extremely impressive. There were a handful of times where the hole was not there, and he made it.
Yep.
Made
I,
that hole, which was great.
there's nothing I love hearing more than hearing what was it? It was oh gosh. It Chris Collinsworth? Might have been. I can't remember who called the game, unfortunately. But I think or David Montgomery got stuffed for like a 2-yard loss, and you could hear him go, and he's not going any. Whoa, shoot! Because then Montgomery squirmed out of it and picked up like 4 yards off of just sort of lurching forward. I mean, he was outstanding. I wouldn't normally be a guy who's huge on paying running backs because I think if you look at what happened with Ezekiel Elliott and so on and so forth, that you can often get into trouble. But oh my gosh, if Montgomery can sustain this, that's going to be a very hard deal to turn away. You know?
Yeah, I've always said since his draft class, he reminded me a little bit of Matt Forte, and tonight he reminded me a lot of Matt Forte in the aspect of this guy just he does a lot of good things out there. He might not always stand out in every single way or in any elite specific way, but he does the right things the right way, and he's just a little more power than Forte.
To say the least.
He doesn't really have a major hole in his game, especially it looks like that speed training he was doing worked because he looks like he filled that gap some.
Absolutely. I think the scariest part for me about watching Montgomery play really well, if I could be honest, was that I sat there thinking that what had mainly made me comfortable with Justin Fields not being the starter was that I looked at a bad offensive line that shouldn't have been able to protect him and definitely shouldn't have been able to generate ground game and thought to myself, well, I don't want Fields to come into the offense and feel like he's got to be a hero. So maybe it's okay for him to get time on the bench until the offensive line figures it out. But I think the scariest part today, Quinten, was that Dalton looked like the problem. Like, the rest of the offense looked better than Dalton, which I didn't anticipate. I didn't think that the Bears' offensive line would play pretty decently overall, you know? Like, again, you have to adjust your expectations. Were they the Colts? They were not. But they didn't look like the Vikings today, who got absolutely annihilated. They didn't look like the Titans, right? They looked like they were supporting a quarterback decently enough. And they certainly supported a running back who went bananas. So what's the holdup? And, I mean, hey, Fields even got time. Like, talk through all of it. How did this make you feel about the obvious Fields watch that was so pertinent to the Bears conversation? It was all it felt like the announcers wanted to talk about any time the Bears were on offense.
So you look at the Bears offense and you're a defensive coordinator. Where do you look at this offense and say, that guy's a problem? Coming into tonight, it was really just one guy, maybe two. I mean, Mooney's a problem in certain areas, but he's not a constant problem. It was really just Allen Robinson. But after tonight, you look at it and you say, man, David Montgomery might be a problem. So now you have a multiplier of that, and if you can add one more problem for these D coordinators in there, it's like offense can be pretty damn good once you have three things that you have to worry about. If you start saying we got that guy Justin Fields over there, that dude, he can run faster than everyone on our defense. That's a problem. He has the ball in his hands every single play. That multiplies what Montgomery can do for an offense because it takes one more defender away from them. Away from it, they're not a target as much anymore, and that's something that can really, really push this offense up to league average. You know, I had to temper myself there at the end.
It's where it can make us really, really passable. Like, I know the feeling. But yeah, I mean, I think the weirdest thing about, I think the weirdest thing about the way that the Bears handled Justin Fields tonight was that they gave him a lot more reps than I was anticipating. Like, It wasn't just a Fields package. He had a pass. He had a shovel pass that I think he misread, but that's neither here nor there. He had a touchdown run. He was the only quarterback to score, like, on the Bears, which is hilarious in and of itself. He handed the ball off on multiple different, like, zone read run kinds of plays. He did a whole lot of things that make me wonder whether the Bears were trying to get him into the game sooner than we think. I mean, it's just hard to read because this was not the Patrick Mahomes plan, to say the absolute minimum. You know what I mean? Like, it felt as if it was not a bad bridge, because I can't tell if Fields just got blitzed or whether he did something wrong with protection to create the pressure that he felt on that red zone 9-yard completion. But he also threw the ball accurately enough for what little he did, obviously ran well on his touchdown pass. He seems to be the quarterback that offers the Bears a little bit more. And I know Andy Dalton kind of vindicated himself during the second and third quarter, consistently getting the ball to where it needed to be and leading to touchdown drives. But I couldn't help but feel like the doomsday clock ticked a little bit closer to midnight, you know?
Yeah. With regards to Dalton on that, I think the true test of a lot of quarterbacks is what you can do in a neutral situation, not what you can do once the other team is up by 2 scores, not what you can do once your team's already up by 2 scores, but what are you doing to win the game when it's completely even, when you're sitting there saying, this is anyone's game, make it yours. And I'm not sure that Dalton's going to be that guy at any point in the future for any team, really, that he's going to be the difference maker, pushing them ahead to start the game.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because, you know, you look around the league and you got to remember that we have to temper our expectations, right? If you look at what happened in Jacksonville, number 1 pick Trevor Lawrence had his moments where he looked really good. He threw a couple of snazzy-looking touchdown passes, made some great throws. He and his Jacksonville Jaguars also got thrown in the dumpster by what was supposed to be the worst team in the league. So I guess you take the good with the bad. And then you go from there to the Jets game, where they played a Sam Darnold-led Panthers team that only put up 19 points. Still, Zach Wilson only put up 14, and they lost. Like, I do feel like that there's this element in Chicago right now of, if we put in Fields, things will get really good, and we'll start winning a ton. Maybe. But I do feel like there are bumps in the road that obviously all rookies go through. Mac Jones had 16 points today as well, so it's not as if any of these rookies played a particularly like great football on the grand scale of things, but they did all get experience. And hey, I guess Fields can hang his hat on having more reps than Trey Lance, so that's not so bad. But at the same time, I do just wonder whether Matt Nagy is eventually going to take a look at this defense and say the offense needs a little bit more juice than what Dalton can offer if we're going to win any games, or whether the defensive backfield can figure something out, whether they start playing quarters and go from there. Though they tried to play quarter, half, and they got burnt for a touchdown. So I really don't know what the defense is going to do.
The one thing on offense, aside from Montgomery, that really stood out to me and really just, I'm not going to shake until I see more of it, is Fields' touchdown run. I thought he was dead to rights. 2 guys right in front of him, was about to get lit up. He just closed that gap so fast. That just changes your offense. It changes what you're doing out there, and it makes his speed feel more real and what he can offer.
Oh yeah, I mean, not to be that guy who's comparing quarterbacks directly, but you remember Andy Dalton when he toted the rock about 8 yards forward to set up the 3rd and 1 that became Montgomery's touchdown run? We were all thinking it. Justin Fields scores that exact same play, you know? He's just that little bit quicker and would be able to plow his way through. Thanks so much, Russ Weeks, for subscribing, by the way. It'll be interesting to see what happens going from here. Like, because at the end of the day, the Rams game is what the Rams game was, and it's over now, and we can move on Thank goodness, because we've worried enough about this one since we got the schedule in March or April or whatever it was. Here comes a Cincinnati team that really struggled to put away the Minnesota Vikings. Like, I thought Cincinnati had it there in the middle, and then they gave it up, and then they barely took overtime down to the absolute wire where Minnesota threw the game away, for lack of any other way to put it. So I don't know whether this Cincy team is good. Certainly, I think they've got better wide receivers than our corners can handle, but there's an element of who doesn't to that. So I feel like it's a decent test for whatever Bears team we want to put out there to try to face him. And I do have a feeling that Matt Nagy has a mental picture of how he wants this Dalton-led team to look. And I think the bright side, you could say, is that the offense clearly had an identity. It had a plan. It looked better than it did with Mitch and Foles, in my opinion, against a good Rams team. The trouble is that the Bears got so spaced on defense, you have to wonder whether Nagy thinks that's good enough right now. And if they get really desperate, do you think Fields comes in?
I wouldn't say for another few weeks. I mean, I could see him getting more and more snaps each week, especially red zone spots or short, third and short type situations. But I think Nagy's going to try to keep him on the bench until at least after the Browns game, for the most part. After that, I think it's open season on him getting out there, because you're talking about a veteran team, full of guys who want to compete, and they might not compete this year, but it's going to help them get closer next year. And some of them probably do believe that they'll compete this year. You know, these guys are competitors. They're not out there to not win, you know, essentially when it comes down to it. So I think Nagy's going to have a hard time keeping him on the bench much longer than a few weeks.
Yeah, to me, I feel like, not to be blustery, I've started to think that it all comes down to the Cincinnati game, right? I think that's one that if I had to try to crawl inside the unusual mind that is Matt Nagy, he has booked as a win, that they have to win that game. And if they don't win that game, I would dare say they're behind schedule. So if they're behind schedule, that means Dalton is losing what he should have been winning, and that's obviously disappointment that might get Fields accelerated. I hope that makes any sense. But yeah, that to me is where I look and see Fields could get in as early as week 4 or as late as after the bye, all depending on whether or not Dalton wins that specific Cincinnati game, because that's going to give him a lot longer leash than if he gets annihilated by the Browns, kind of like he did tonight against the Rams, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I keep thinking with Nagy is, I mean, we're talking about a coach who won't even discuss injuries in his press conference. I'm not sure I buy even what he's telling insiders on some of this stuff. I think that he is playing the long con on some of this and hoping it helps him in one game, the other team not having the game plan for Fields, if it does at all, for half a game even. I think that that's the NFL. There's only 17 of these games. Every one of them counts a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. And the bright side, like we know, is that the Bears are still in first place in their division, which is hilarious, but it's true. And they ended up scoring more than the Packers, so they're third place in terms of scoring, with the Lions ahead of everybody, if memory serves. But all that to say that the Bears walked into a game that we kind of knew they were going to lose, and they lost. And the defense looked a little worse than we expected. I would dare say the offense looked a little better, that they continuously crossed into the opponent's side of the field, which again, tiny, low, high school hurdle to pass over, but not one the Bears were able to do so consistently. So from here, it feels to me like the door is open for the Bears to tell their story, whatever it is. You know, that again, it's not something that you should wave the banner and be like, the Bears actually won. Not really. They got beat. And there were a lot of things to worry about when it comes to their defense specifically. But their offense, going forward, I dare say, looked even better than the 2018 offense in terms of just a play-to-play identity. It's just a matter of whether they can iterate on that against a Bengals team that's probably going to do a better job of guarding everything underneath 10 yards, or technically 11 yards, right?
Right. And one thing that I do think for that Bengals game, I would not be shocked if this defense looks a whole lot better. You think about where their strengths are and where the Bengals' offensive weaknesses are, it's a much better matchup for them as far as taking advantage of those weaknesses. Because the Rams have a solid O-line. They protect the quarterback pretty well, and they match up those run fits with their pass fits pretty well. McVay is a strong offensive coach. I'm not nearly as high on Zach Taylor as I am Sean McVay. I'm not nearly as high on the Bengals O-line as I am the Rams O-line. And I think that the Bears D-line could do a lot more in that game just based on the talent they're going against.
I see that.
And how talented they are.
Absolutely. And that's a podcast for another day. But if we were going to close up, if you have any if we were going to close up, what would you say your final thoughts are on the Rams game?
I have two. And the first is pretty petty. Jimmy Graham, 15 snaps. That's a lot of money for 15 snaps.
That they extended it to next year. They extended it to next year so that he could catch a 9-yard completion in the red zone because he's just a red zone warrior.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love touchdowns. But I'm just not sure that his price tag makes a lot of sense for 15 snaps a game. And then my other main thought is just to summarize the game. Bears gave up big plays, and they couldn't create big plays. That's the game in a nutshell to me.
I'll give my final thoughts that I'm still pleasantly surprised with the Bears' development plan for Justin Fields because I really don't know how much it would have helped him depending on how much playbook he's got control of. But past a certain point, I'm offering benefit of the doubt to a coaching staff that I don't know has earned it. So feel free to just throw that thought out if you don't want to. One other thought that I'll throw out there is Allen Robinson had, if memory serves, 35 yards on 11 targets, and that's just not going to do it for a guy that the Bears need to be their wide receiver one. I'm glad that Mooney and Goodwin and Bird had a place in this offense and made a difference, a positive difference at that. But we need more out of Allen Robinson. And I know that I'm putting a lot on him when I say this, but for instance, that 4th and 4 where the ball hit the wrong shoulder with a guy draped all over him, I would love to see him catch that ball because he's made tougher plays, and that's why you throw it to your wide receiver one. Again, I'm not being fair to him, but he's done so many unfair things throughout his career that he's made me used to it. So I would love to see him become that guy in case Montgomery isn't here and there, or the situation doesn't call for it. But as far as another final thought goes, I feel like we covered it all. Allen Robinson getting a little more involved next week, like you said, create more big plays, try to limit the opponents. Feels like that's the game in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, it's a simple game, right?
Super simple. Either way, Quinten, thanks so much for jumping on this post-game show. Couldn't have done it without you. Feel free, please, let the viewers and listeners know where they can find your work online.
Yeah, just follow on Twitter at BuckhissStats and on Tap Sportsnet. That's where I write, the site I write for. And also, I'm now doing a podcast with my good friend Jayton May. That is titled Facts versus Stats, NFL Bets. I take a very analytical, numbers-based view on the bets. He is a former Division II offensive lineman who goes by his gut. So it's some entertaining content.
I love it. That's awesome. Thanks so much for jumping on, man. Seriously, great having you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
And that'll do it. Thanks so much. Awesome. Now we can get into Q&A. So thank you so much for all the viewers that have hung in there. Good show, I thought anyways. But at this point, we can digest this Bears game. I don't know about nicely, but like we can walk back through it. I saw a whole bunch of comments that I'd have to go back through and read again, but feel free to pepper some in. I'll just go back through. Case, I didn't see his webcam as dead, but I did see, for instance, Quinten, your webcam would freeze here and there. I'm just glad the audio came through.
Yeah, no, my bad. I got a cheap little laptop here with the camera, so it might not have been great for the stream, but I appreciate finding out.
It was good enough, is what I would say, but definitely kept going in and out here and there. And John, I loved your point, John Dell'Italia. I loved the fact that you pointed out that the Bears' identity really didn't have a lot to do with Dalton. I mean, I tend to think that Fields should be able to interpret a defense and throw a hook, but I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what the Bears have tried to install. Obviously, we're not in the room. So the bright side is that it felt like the run game was really carrying the game plan with the occasional pass here or there or throwing into the flat, the sort of things that you really could have a rookie do because they're fairly simple reads. And if they did insert Fields, I tend to think he would at least be able to learn successfully, even if he wasn't winning. I don't know. That's where I'm at, Quinten. I don't know about you. Like, it didn't feel as if Fields played today, he would have developed any bad habits. And that's what I guess I care about, you know?
Yeah. The one thing that really I thought I could understand some of was the argument of, you don't want Aaron Donald to kill this kid. But Aaron Donald didn't wreck the game. I mean, the Bears were able to find ways to limit what he did. And maybe Dalton had a lot to do with that as far as the line calls and recognizing blitzes or where he was coming from. But it seemed to me like he wouldn't have really hurt Fields anywhere from a developmental standpoint in this game, which is, again, easy to say because I don't know the impact of Andy Dalton at the line of scrimmage, calling stuff out, pointing stuff out, making decisions. But it seemed like this is a roster that could have played Fields today and avoided those bad habits being created.
Right. And I mean, I still think they would have gotten destroyed, Like, that to me is, I think, what has become the real key here is people saying, let's play Fields so that we can win. I feel like that might not be realistic, but playing Fields so that you can at least let the kid learn, that's starting to make more sense as the offense starts to look more functional. I didn't feel like Nagy shot himself in the foot near as often with play calls as much as it felt, to me at least, like Nagy tried things and some of them worked and we went, good play call. You know what I mean? And some of them did not work. Like that, the toss crack or the toss out in like the late first quarter sticks out to me. Not even the reverse. Like there were plenty of things the Bears tried, especially at the start of the game. I remember their run game was 37 yards, 0 yards, 12 yards, 0 yards. Like they were finding themselves, but they did. And I guess at the end of the day, that was really all I cared about because the Bears running game for 2 years it's been so abysmal,
I mean, if you really want to go throwing out bad play calls, I mean, you can look at any play caller and find some pretty rough ones too. Not to defend Nagy too much here, but I don't know if anyone caught the Kansas City game today, but Andy Reid had the toss play to an offensive lineman to try to catch people off guard, and it was just hilarious.
Oh my gosh. My favorite was, I thought you were going to talk about the absolute banger that was Brian Daboll's 4th and 1 attempt, where he decided that the end defender would, for some reason, be watching the quarterback. I mean, that's the only explanation to me that I can think of from that Bills game, because that was one of the worst plays I've ever seen. And I've seen that, like, that one play that the Colts ran that never should have existed. I'm sure you've heard that broken down by Pat McAfee. Like,
Oh yeah, it's great.
at least when you hear that one sounds like an accident, whereas the Dabble one was fully intentional, and it was a no chancer that lost 7 yards. But I digress. Mark, oh gosh, I hope I get your name right. Is that Lazed or is that Iacid with a capital I? I don't know. But he asks, what do I think about the aggressiveness on fourth down? I have no idea if you're ultra analytics on this. I actually loved it. Like, why not? You're on the 40. Whether it's 4th and 6 or 4th and 1 or 4th and 4, go for it. Because this is an offensive-driven league. Touchdowns are what you need. You don't even necessarily need field goals, and punts don't really help you with this defense. To me, at least. Mark, I hope I pronounced it even close to right. Feel free to put a pronunciation guide, and I'll get it right next time. But as I know you called it idiotic, as ridiculous as it looked like for Dalton to keep failing on fourth downs, the Bears were trying to win the correct way, in my opinion. Their quarterback just wasn't delivering when they needed him to. I don't know. What did you think, Q?
So I guess I should say, hunting inside opponent 50 hurts my soul. So generally, I'm for going for it on fourth down when you're in that territory, just because if you have a dominant defense, maybe you can justify punting, but when you don't, you're not going to win many games there. At least with the Bears situation where they're at, they need points. They're not gaining a whole lot by not going for it. I mean, ultimately, you're looking at maybe a 20, 30-yard punt. How many 30-yard plays did they give up today? It's not a killer, those 30 yards in those situations for you. You need to be able to get points, and they failed on a lot of those fourth downs, so I guess they weren't getting points. But there hits a point where you have to try. You have to keep pushing towards the goal line there, because it's fruitless not to.
Right. And, I mean, like John said, one of the fourth down plays was that no-call Robinson DPI, which was pretty bad. Like, a pretty bad no-call. I know.
You could argue that was a big swing at that point, right. But...
And, I mean, hey, it wasn't the Saints-Rams no-call, where it was, like, very, 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 very obvious. Because I know the way that... I loved the way Collinsworth... It was Collinsworth, I swear. But I love the way Collinsworth put it, where he went, ooh, I don't know, I thought he was a little early. Oh, yeah, he's very clearly early. Like, on replay, you could tell, But... even so, Akusai points out that for some reason they did punt on a 4th and 2 at the Rams 47. But I think that was still at the stage of the game, Akusai, where, remember, all Nagy knows is the defense being good. Like, I'm not even trying to be silly. You know what I mean? Like, all he knows is, I don't know if I want to punt here, but I mean, like, the defense will probably get us ball back. But yeah, they didn't this time. And it felt like the 4th and 15 was a clear showing of, like, we don't win this game if we don't get this, which was wild.
I think on the 4th and 2, I feel like this is something we've seen with Nagy before. When they've failed a few times on fourth down, he starts to get a little gun shy on it until he absolutely needs it. But I think that was a mistake. I mean... you might only be down the 6 at that point, I think it was, or maybe it was later in the game. I don't recall exactly, but in the same situation, you need points.
Right.
You're not going to beat this Rams team with the 6-7 points you have, or whatever it was at the time, and that clock is just ticking down on you.
Mm-hmm. I feel like where Nagy gets really caught all over the place is that Nagy wants to do what's best for his team, which sounds kind of easy, right? Like, you should know that. But at the same time, I think that can be a really nebulous question to ask yourself. For instance, it's best for your team to get points. Okay, well, it's 4th and 4, and if we fail again, it's going to be our 3rd failed conversion. And does that affect the confidence of the offense? Am I hurting us because I keep telling them that they should go for it and giving them a play that, don't get me wrong, I think it should work. Like, Cole Kmet was wide open on that first Allen Robinson one. And if Dalton had found him or Robinson had come up with a tough predetermined catch, the Bears are still in business, you know? But I do wonder whether that gun shyness comes from asking yourself whether or not you're hurting the offense's temperament. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that makes sense. I think that it's almost trying to balance the analytical side versus the emotional side of it,
Right.
and the I don't want to say feelings, but the morale of who you're coaching and their ability to feel like I can go out there and do what's asked of me.
Yep. And I got to tell you, I have to wonder, the more that I read different things, how much the offense, A, will change, but B, how often or how long it's really going to wait to put in Justin Fields. Because I don't know if you saw this cue, but David Montgomery was quoted as saying, there's just something about Justin Fields, basically. Like, that he's got a magic aura to him. Like, the Bears players love him.
And does he not, though? Like, I mean, you
Obviously.
there was a play where he came in tonight, and it was just, he's so calm. Him standing behind the center, his shotgun, waiting for the snap, just puts his arm up, puts the guy in motion. Everything is just so smooth, so calm, so he just seems so ready to go. And it's almost scary as a Bears fan to think that, because it's like he seems so ready. You're scared that he's not.
Right.
It just, everything points to it being like, this is the guy. This is the dude.
Yep.
And it's never felt this way for me as a Bears fan before. Even going back to when they got Cutler, it was like stuff felt more jittery. Stuff to feel as smooth as it is when Fields is in there is just weird.
Right.
And worrisome because it's a new thing.
No kidding. I mean, we're just going to have to... I have had to tell myself that he's not comfortable quite yet with the playbook. Like, that's all I've been able to do, is to say, or to get through it, because he's a rookie, and I don't know. I mean, maybe it's all just a ploy, right? To get through the Browns game or something like that. Maybe Nagy thought this was going to go a lot better and looks at the fact that the ground game got going and says, like, oh, shoot, Andy's got to do better than that or something. I don't know. But
I can believe that he believes that this was going to go a lot better.
I know. That's how I feel.
I was reading a book about the 2011 Jets, and the author, he spent the season with them, very close with Rex Ryan, and I think Tannenbaum was the GM then. And he basically, at one point in the first chapter, I think it even was, he said, to be an NFL coach, you have to be one of the most optimistic people on earth.
I believe it.
To be able to deal with all the criticism, all the issues that these guys are thrown. And I think that Nagy is probably one of the most optimistic among the optimists.
No kidding.
I think that he really believes that this can work outstanding with Andy Dalton. Just whether the reality is going to hit him at some point here sooner or later, that it's not working.
And it isn't. I mean, it didn't is a better way to put it. Isn't implies plurality. One thing Mark pointed out that I think is worth mentioning is, because he's right, Q, that crowd at Soldier Field is going to be, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be an away game. It's going to be worse than an away game. It's going to be like living a nightmare if Dalton does anything wrong. You know what I mean? Dalton could throw a completion and get booed. Like, Soldier Field's at that point. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it is not a friendly crowd there when the Bears aren't good.
Yes, but not just when the Bears aren't good. Dalton. You know what I mean? Like, Dalton isn't Fields. And Fields scored a touchdown.
So, think back to Mike Glennon. What that was like. Think back to the reception that Trubisky got versus the one that Fields got. So multiply Mike Glennon's play at Soldier Field by the difference in the reception of the rookie quarterback.
Yep.
And that's what you get.
It a mess. One thing, I think we'll go we'll go one more question, unless you guys really pop something crazy in there. And then I think we'll close up because it's almost midnight. like on a work night. Pancakes or waffles is not the one. I'm a waffle guy. Are you a pancake or a waffle person?
Okay, all the way.
Really, all the way? Do you put something in your pancakes?
Maybe some bananas, but I'm just a pancake purist.
I love the crispiness of the waffle, but that's just me. So, Cole World asked, "Do you think Eddie Jackson can return to 2018 form, or was that just a fluke season for him?" And I feel like this is a complicated question. I've talked about this a little bit, but I feel like the trouble with Jackson is that Jackson was a ball-first defensive back playing in a defense that had so many quality pieces around it that with Prince Amukamara and who nobody ever talks about how solid Prince Amukamara was that year. But so Amukamara and Fuller was playing really well. Bryce Callahan was one of the best nickels in the league, and Adrian Amos did all of the walking up and hitting. So Eddie Jackson could sit back, play center field, never have to make any tackles, and just pick the ball off. And frankly, anticipate where the ball was going to go and get there before the quarterback threw it. The problem is that then people, after 2018, just started not throwing at him. You know? Like, why throw near Jackson when you don't have to? And Jackson blanketed his assignments. ESPN did like a coverage analysis, not just like passer rating by, but like separation statistics on defensive backs to their targets. And Eddie Jackson was the best one. Like, Eddie Jackson is a very good cover defensive back, but right now you don't have to throw at him. Like, you can just throw at Marquis Christon. You can just throw at Kendall Vildor. Like, why look at the guy who is a massive danger when Tashawn Gibson's out there guarding his grass so diligently, guarding that grass, and Cooper Kupp's wide open downfield? Like, who cares? And I feel like that's the trouble, is that Bears fans are looking and they're like, where's our ball hawk? Where's our defensive back? And quarterbacks are like, oh, he's over there. I'm not throwing at him. Like, not unless I get something very obvious, like that the first guy that he didn't carry through, and I think it was Van Jefferson, and ended up allowing that 67-yard touchdown pass that, damn it, Eddie Jackson, just touch him while he's down, driving me crazy. But you get the idea. Like, the trouble to me, if you're seeing what I'm seeing, Q, isn't that Jackson got worse. It's kind of like Jamal Adams in Seattle, where he just isn't meshing with the current talent meets scheme nature of the defense. And he's getting paid a whole lot of money to not mesh, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of data that I've looked at that backs up what you're saying. Really, I think that Jackson is a guy who he needs strong cover guys around him because you need to force the other offense to attack Jackson's zone. You need to force them to say, we need to go into that danger area because we need to take these risks.
Right.
And there's really two ways you do that. Outstanding coverage around him, which the Bears don't have right now, or going up multiple scores.
Yep.
So that the other team needs
to throw
fast points. They need to go downfield. And that's where Jackson can thrive. That's both of those things are something he had in 2018.
And pressuring the passer, just to throw something else in there. If the quarterback's got to release it a little sooner than he wants to, he'll put the ball into harm's way plenty of times because he has to, you know?
Yeah, this is something that I'm actually very intrigued by, and something that I tend to look at a lot of numbers on, but not exactly publish a lot on, because it ends up being very nitty-gritty detailed, the analysis that I do on it. But the large majority of turnovers, sacks, fumbles, impact defensive plays in the NFL happen when an offense is under pressure to produce points, when they're down multiple scores, when it's later in the game, when they're in desperation mode and need to make stuff happen, is when they make those mistakes. And those are situations the Bears haven't been in a lot.
Mm-hmm. So Cole asks, for instance, like, would I say he's worth what he's being paid? I think the hardest part about it, Cole, is that I would tell you he earned what he's being paid but he's not continuing to justify it. Does that make sense, Quinten? That like right now, I think anybody would look at Eddie Jackson and say, no, if I could take it back, I would, right? But
he was a free agent today. I don't think he gets the same contract.
Not even close.
I think he's very, very coveted by a team that has cap space and good defenders.
Mm-hmm.
Contracts. You know, I think they say this guy can come in and be an all-pro here right now. Might not be in 5 years when we lose some of these guys as free agents. But right now, he's a huge difference maker for this defense.
Right. Well, I wish it was. Like, I think is the trouble, right? I would describe Eddie Jackson as the icing on a cake, which sounds really harsh, but I think I'm going to follow through with it, right? Where a really good cake still needs good icing, you know? Like, you do need, ultimately, what the thing that's going to put you over the top. And Eddie Jackson will do that. Like, Eddie Jackson was a huge part of the dominant defensive performances that the Bears had in 2018. Because, again, he could suss out where the offense wanted to attack and just beat them there. But now, you can't really do that because the offense can attack where they want to. And unless Eddie Jackson's going to go try and, again, like, that's why I tried to say on the podcast, at the end of the day, Jackson's still just one defensive back, and he's a safety at that. So he can't do the corner's job for them, and he can't do Gibson's job for him, and he can't do X, Y, Z, so on and so forth. He has to just be a safety. And I think that's honestly, I feel like the trouble right now that we're seeing is that defenders and high-paid defenders in general, it creates this tough thing to deal with for a lot of teams, because the Bears right now have Mack, who's objectively good, and Hicks, who played very well tonight, and Eddie Jackson, who's really highly paid, and Roquan, who's who deserves to be really highly paid. And normally they would have Goldman, who's pretty highly paid in and of themselves. Like, they've got half of a starting 11 that's a high quality defensive talent, and it just did not matter, you know? Because if you've got 3 holes on your defense, you've got 2 holes too many. And even then, Case, I know Quinn is, but I left Quinn out deliberately because Quinn is truly that, like, paid instead of good. The trouble here is, I would tell you that you could probably trot out nobodies alongside Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, and they would be just fine on offense, you know? Like, they would do perfectly well because all you really need on offense is the best couple guys to be the, like, tip of the spear, if you will, and then Van Jefferson can go get himself open 67 yards downfield because he's just got that kind of space. Defense is the opposite. You'd almost rather have 11 B players that then Belichick can mold into the great defenses he's created, instead of 5 A to A minus players and then a whole bunch of C's, D's, and F's, you know?
Yeah. I think with Jackson, where I really sit on him is he's a guy who can make a good defense great, not a guy who can make a okay defense good. If that really makes sense. And I think the Bears are just okay defense right now. And I think a guy like Khalil Mack or Aaron Donald is more of one who can make okay defense good, which makes me start to question how okay the Bears are because they have Khalil Mack.
Khalil Mack's just been unproductive. I mean...
Yeah. No, I mean, like, from the aspect of if they didn't have Khalil Mack, would they even be okay?
I don't know. I mean, I really think that it all starts at the back end, right? Like, everybody talked about Aaron Donald, and that's great. Aaron Donald certainly deserved his DPOY candidacy, but let me tell you this, Q. You know who I picked for DPOY? Like, oh gosh, Case, what's up? But yeah, no. If we didn't have Mac, our pass rush wouldn't exist. But the point I want to get at here is that I picked Myles Garrett for the likely DPOY, and I did it because I found the best backfield in football, in my opinion. They got torched by the Chiefs today, but who doesn't? In the Browns. And then I just took their best pass rusher. because chances are he could pick up a whole bunch of coverage sacks and look really great on TV because the defensive backfield behind him covers for him, you know?
Yeah.
Donald had Troy Hill and John Johnson and Jalen Ramsey and a very good Rams secondary behind him. So surprise, surprise, he destroyed people because you were left alone with him, you know? You couldn't just ditch the ball. Like, what we did today was unusual, I think. The fact that we just dinked and dunked almost at will, that surprises me that we even picked up 200 yards. But, oh, yeah, Case, absolutely. Garrett's awesome, too. Like, it doesn't help anything, or it doesn't hurt. But it's more to say that, like, I am of the belief that Aaron Donald has become overrated. Not because he doesn't deserve to be rated as one of the best defensive players in football, period, but because it makes it sound like he's a quarterback, and nobody's a quarterback. Does that make sense?
Yeah. On the defensive side, there's no one who multiplies talent the way a quarterback does on offense.
It's all additive. And as soon as there's a hole in the dam, the water all leaks out. It's closer to a balloon in that sense. You can't have holes or all the air just shoots right out.
You can think about the Bears defense last year before the Green Bay game when Buster Screen got concussion or whatever, before he took a major downslide, and after, and it was two different defenses.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Because he was all right, and then he was terrible. And
it opened the floodgates on the entire defense, you know? They went from a top 10 unit to a bottom half of the league unit overnight.
Yep, exactly. One hole really does that much on the defensive end. And that hurts because the Bears are rife with them. Like, it's rough when, or in my opinion, it's rough when people are like, don't we have Deion Bush on the roster? Like, Deion Bush shouldn't be your answer to anything. And yet, Mark, to be clear, it's not that I think that Aaron Donald is overrated at his position. He's awesome. It's more to say that, like you mentioned, Q, I feel like some people talk as if you could throw Donald out there with a bunch of nobodies and he'd still be great. And I do think that the same thing that's happened to Mac would happen to him, basically.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's like if you could make an entire defense of people on the current level, like as far as NFL respect goes, of a Jalen Johnson or a Bilal Nichols, that would be a really good defense. If you made an entire offense of players on the level, including quarterback, of like a Darnell Mooney, it's not going to be a very good offense because you don't have a difference maker at the quarterback spot.
Yep. Exactly. You're pretty much nailing it. And Shy Northside, I agree. I mean, like, I don't know. The Donald thing is weird. Like, is he because somebody asked, like, is he worth comparing to the best defensive players ever? And I'm like, I don't know. Defensive player of the years are kind of like pitchers to me, where, like, it feels as if the great ones kind of come in and out. You know what I mean? Right now,
it's really hard to question that without going back and looking at the rest of the team around Reggie White, the rest of the team around J.J. Watt in 2014, when he was on that ridiculous streak he was on. Who else, what did they have around? It becomes such a massive data question around.
You get to the Dwight Freeneys, you get to the Charles Woodsons, you deal with the Ed Reeds, right? You could even argue right now, like, just based off of what we saw this week, Vita Vea is probably in the lead, you know?
Yeah.
Vita Vea was an utter monster in the Tampa Bay Dallas game. He's incredible, period.
He also is surrounded by Ndamukong Suh, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Shaq Barrett. So he doesn't get the attention that a guy like Geno Atkins in his prime did, you know?
Nope. And he's got Jamal Dean and Antoine Winfield, and I don't think they're as near as good as the Browns, but a solid coverage unit behind him that can create that time he needs to just be the just terror he is.
Yeah.
But either way, going back, or like circling this back to Eddie Jackson, I'm going to be very, 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 very direct. I don't know if this is going to... I mean, I think it'll get better because it was bad today. Yeah. But I don't think Eddie Jackson can just save the Bears defensive backs unit. Like, Sean Desai's got some magic he's got to work. Like, Gibson can't be missing assignments.
One man can only cover so much of the field.
Right. Gibson can't miss assignments. Jackson can't miss assignments. Christensen's got to at least know where he's going, and so on and so forth. Like, if it was me, I would try to figure out whether they could pull in like a Nickel Roby-Coleman or some other nickel, because I just don't think that Christensen can carry water like forever. But
or if you can find another outside corner and bump Vildor into nickel.
Right.
I'd be open to that too, but that's probably a little tougher to find.
Exactly. But either way, we've hit the midnight mark. I've got a podcast to edit. We've all got work tomorrow. So, hey, thanks so much for joining, man. Honestly, pleasure having you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Feel free to pop in feedback. Like this video if you did enjoy it. That would be super helpful. Feedback's always great on what worked, what didn't work, and anything else you want to see from here. Like, I want to make sure that I go through, break down some things. The first thing I know I wanted to look at was to see if I couldn't illustrate all the ins and outs of that Bears running game, because if you guys want to see more defensive stuff, we can, but it tends to feel like negative things are sad. You know what I mean, Quinten? Where it's like, you write the negative article. You don't make a negative video. Like, videos are for fun things. But either way, just let me know. You guys have been great. Thank you so much, Quinten. And we will see you guys next time. This is where...